You're on.
Okay, great. So here we are in the friendly neighborhood in Eugene at the homestead of Jessica, Matt, and Avery, Avery the younger, collecting Scion for the Agrarian Sharing Network. The friendly neighborhood is going to be a core pivot in our effort to have these distributed propagation fairs that we're hosting all over the bioregion. And we're here today. It's what date are we, Jessica? Where are we?
It's January 15th today.
January 15th. Okay, and the timing is significant. We're here today to cut Scion.
So what's Scion?
What's Scion? Okay, so Scion is essentially it's the official word for the cuttings that we take off fruit trees that we then attach to rootstocks to create entirely new trees. And when we cut the Scion off the mother trees or the papa trees, is important. We need to cut the Scion when the wood is dormant. We're cutting the wood in the winter when it's dormant. And we'll keep this wood dormant after we've cut it. We'll show in a few more details in a little while. We will keep this wood dormant, we'll keep it cool, and we'll keep it moist. And then we'll take it out of our fridge or wherever we're storing it, typically in March or in April, and then graft it onto rootstocks where the sap's beginning to rise. What we find is that what we're really looking for, can you come over here,
Yep.
Jessica? Is that these buds here, when we say the wood is dormant, we're wanting to cut the Scion before these buds have started to swell or started to push, as we say. Because once they've started to push, at that point, basically they're needing nutrients. And if we take a piece of wood, if we cut a Scion, for example, in March or April, that's pushing or beginning to produce a flower or so on and so forth, at that point, if we try and attach that to a rootstock, the demands of the Scion are too strong to be supported by the new wound, we need to let the healing take place. So what we do is a little piece of magic. We cut the wood when it's dormant, we take it, we attach it to the rootstock that's beginning to push, and by the time the Scion has really begun to wake up, the join has healed to a degree, if it works out that way, and typically it does. It doesn't take too much.
So
skill to make that happen.
what materials do we need to?
Okay, so basically what we're going to be doing today is the official tool, sharp tools. It pays to have tools that are clean too. One of the quickest ways you can spread disease is by cutting wood off diseased trees and then taking your... Did it?
Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, taking wood off diseased trees and then either passing the wood around or then taking your clippers that are diseased, cutting fresh non-diseased wood but passing the disease onto it. So if you can, do make a point of sticking your Falcos or what have you in a solution that'll clean them up. So getting back to timing, it's now mid-January, and typically we like to cut Scion in a particular order over the course of the midwinter, early spring. This time of year we're looking to cut the stone fruit typically, which is peaches in particular, super early, plums, cherries, nectarines as well. And the reason we like to cut them in this time of year is because they start to push before the apples and the pears, which typically will generally be wanting to cut in early to mid-February, if everything's working out. The Asian pears typically will cut before the European pears.
So there's a calendar for the fruits.
Yeah, and then the apples generally
flowering.
come in after that. So we can cut later, but basically that's the sort of the ideal timing for it. And then what we find is that you can push your cutting a little later. At that point what you might find is that buds will be starting to push on a tree. Typically we like to cut material that's in the sunshine, that's had the sun on it. As we move later you might find that the buds have begun to push on a tree, but on the shady side of the tree on the north side of the tree, you might find some wood that hasn't started to push. So that's one of the tactics we use if we're getting to material late but still want to cut scion.
Okay.
So timing is important. We want to cut the wood whilst it's dormant, store it whilst it's dormant, so that when we pull it out of the fridge in March or April or what have you, or in May, whenever we're grafting, we have material that's not demanding too much in the way of nutrients.
Got it.
Okay, the next sort of topic we really sort of want to talk about is where on the tree do we want to cut wood? Or what type of tree do we want to cut wood from? So, common sense. You're really wanting to go to trees that are healthy and that are vigorous. If a tree is diseased, if it's got blistering on it or blackening on it, give it a miss. Or if it's to a degree low vigor, give it a miss. You might want to make an exception if it's a very rare variety and you're wanting to graft it yourself, but we don't want to make a habit of passing around low vigor varieties that are diseased. It's just not something we want to make a habit of doing. And then once we get to the tree, a couple of things to keep in mind. We're really wanting to get the most vigorous wood off a tree if we can, with a couple of important refinements to that rule. Very typically you'll find when you get to a tree that some of the most vigorous wood is from the suckers or water sprouts. Suckers are typically growths that come up from the base of a tree, right here. And very often they're volunteers from rootstock, from the rootstock itself, rather than from the variety itself. And sometimes you'll find that these suckers go right up into the tree and might even branch out. So you have to be very particular when you're actually identifying the wood on the tree.
That's tricky.
You want to make sure that you're not cutting rootstock. Here we've got a sucker that's coming up from the side of the tree, but I'm relatively confident that's above the ground. So I'd be okay taking that. But if this was down here, it would be very suspicious, or coming out from the very base of the tree, it'd be very suspicious. So you
it's
want
worth
to give that
following
a miss.
it down to the see where it's going.
But oftentimes you'll find that on the tree itself you'll have a lot of upward growth, the water sprouts and so on and so forth. For the most part there's a tendency to cut that for scion because it's vigorous and it's there and it's available and you're wanting to prune it out of the tree anyways to a degree. But what we typically find is that the upward growing wood tends to be slower to produce fruit than the wood that comes out at a lateral. So what we're really wanting to do is find vigorous growth on the laterals if we can. And then our next favoured choice is what we might call the sort of terminal buds growing up in the sort of the upper part of the tree. That's generally what you'll find is where the vigorous and most healthy wood is.
The terminal buds meaning that they're the topmost growths?
Yeah. The stuff sort of way up there and stuff going like that. Generally you'll find that there's a lot of vigour and a lot of energy there. Some trees you'll get to, for example, don't have much vigour at all. It might be that you've got an old favourite tree in an orchard and you'll basically not have much wood to not have much choice to collect on. The core thing that we're trying to do, of course, is to try and find what we call first year wood, which is like last year's growth. And sometimes you'll find that last year's growth might only amount to that much wood on the end of that's all you got last year. So we might move into sort of second year growth. But for the most part, we're wanting to get last year's growth, first year's growth, and you can typically see it on a tree. This is last year's growth up to here, and then where does it go down to the neck, down to there, and then so on, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, and so on and so forth. Okay. There was something else I wanted to say about that, but I forget. Well, let's move into actually sort of cutting the wood now, shall we? So, what we're wanting to do is cut wood that's typically about a pencil in a typical lead pencil in diameter. There are many reasons for that, but typically generally it's easiest to graft with that diameter, and for the most part the rootstock that we're working with tends to come in at between 3/18 and a 1/4 inch in diameter, and it basically works for us to collect that sort of material. And you'll oftentimes want to combine your winter pruning with your Scion collection, so there's a mix and match in terms of balance about what you're essentially wanting to do. But essentially I would come in here. I'm going to make a little bit of a pruning cut because we can. I'm going to find my outward facing bud, take a little bit of a cut, and I've basically got my Scion.
So how long do the Scion have to be?
What we're looking at is something typically about 1 foot long. Okay, so what I just collected a little bit here, a little earlier. We didn't want to waste too much time. There's a mixture and match of different diameters here. As I said, we're basically looking, our optimal is about a pencil width. But what I would do here is I've collected this material, is I'll come in, make a nice flat cut at the bottom, comme ça, and then I'll want to cut this down to about 10 or 12 inches, 8 to 12 inches. There are a variety of reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with storage.
So you can cut the top and the bottom?
Yeah, cutting the top and the bottom. And I'm basically bringing this down to size. And I would generally, oftentimes, maybe cut a bunch more Scion. But let's just do this for the sake of demonstration here. And then, very important to wrap it with a rubber band. There's the old technique, is sort of doing that. It's a bit of a pain in the butt. What we've learned, the way we do it, is we've simply put a rubber band around one piece, wrap it round, select it, put it round another, and it makes it extraordinarily easy to undo. When I want to undo it, I just pull it off, and the whole thing comes undone.
That is handy.
Absolutely crucial that we ID. I was just saying to Jessica that I was wandering around the pear conservatory in Corvallis with 3 of the foremost nurserymen in the Northwest a few years ago, at the height of the pear season, fresh fruit coming on, and what everybody was talking about was, what type of pen do you use to make markings with? Sharpies work well. There are different forms of Sharpies. Anything that is not absolutely permanent, move it out of your world. The best ones we find are the laundry rubber dub Sharpies. They tend to have white bodies rather than greys. And this one says extreme fade resistance. I'm not too sure what that means. I would advise going with Sharpies. You'll typically find if you go to the hardware store, there are all sorts of pens that they sell that are proffered and advertised as water resistant and water this and water that. For the most part, I find they don't cut it. Plain old Sharpies, permanent markers work well. If it's running out a little bit, and when you write on your label, it's not coming through very well, get rid of it. You want a Sharpie that's marking well. I'll put down here, this say Uberline pear. And one of the reasons you want it well is because we're going to be storing these in plastic bags with moisture in the back of the fridge for a long time. And there's a tendency for things to fade.
Oh, in the fridge?
In the fridge, yeah. So basically what I have here is a label, very clearly labelled, okay? And I'll wrap it round one of the sticks here. And Shazam, I've got something sorted out. We'll put it on the top end of the stick rather than the bottom, because typically we find that there comes a point where we start to move the sign around and put them in little containers and so on and so forth, and if the label's at the bottom, it's a pain in the butt. So we'll sort of keep the label towards the top of the collection, and then you can also, if you want, throw on another rubber band at the top to sort of keep it nice and solid. So that's a good solid little piece of Scion to collect. And I should stipulate at this point that the label is no more accurate than your sense of what the tree actually is. If you're unsure about what a variety is, stipulate that on a label. It's not fair or necessarily polite to put wood into a community or into a world labeled as something it isn't. It's not like picking up some tchotchke off a shelf. If someone takes this wood, puts it on a tree, has to wait 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 years, depending on the variety and the rootstock and so on, the crop type and the rootstock, to determine that what they have is not the tree they were told they had, it can be a very disappointing experience. So it doesn't mean that you can't collect material that you're not entirely sure about, but you need to label that and to be honest. You don't need to fake anything. Just be honest about what you've got or the degree of certainty you have around a particular fruit type. Maybe you've got a spectacular fruit tree in your garden, but you don't know what the variety is. You can collect it and attach a description to it that's very honest about what it is. So that's accurate identification of a tree is absolutely crucial. And of course, if you know anything about the tree, whether it's has a particular trait for disease resistance, or it bears every year rather than every 2 years, or so on and so forth. These are details that we can add.
Or sometimes how old the tree is.
Oh, how old the tree is to a degree will sort of definitely work. I don't know. I think that's sort of mostly about it for the moment. I can't think of anything else to add.
Okay.
Is that all right?
I think so.
All right.
Thank you,
we'll go
Nick.
with that.
All right, we're started.
Okay.
We
So
forgot something.
Okay. So I left my notes behind today. So I completely spaced adding sort of this other crucial aspect, which is how do we store this stuff? What we want to do is to keep this material moist and cool. We want to keep it dormant, basically. And the best way we can bury this material in the ground, in the shade, maybe on the north side of a house or in a barn or so on and so forth, and keep it relatively cool. But for most of us, the easiest way to do it is to put it in a fridge. We're basically looking at temperatures probably between 36 and 38 degrees. You don't want the material to freeze. So if you've got some funky fridge in your garage and you say, oh, we'll just put it in there, but you're not completely sure that it's not going to freeze, give it a miss. You'll basically destroy the wood. So the important thing we want to do is to put this material in something safe. When in the old-fashioned days, when people used to deliver newspapers to houses, the plastic bags that newspapers came in worked very well. I'll typically take a bag like this and put a whole bunch of bunches of Scion in it, and not necessary, of course, and I'll put, these bags are not hugely thick, so I put these in 2 bags just to make doubly sure. And I'm going to put a little bit of moisture in here too. Comme ça. See, can you see?
You're just
Probably
pouring
just
a little
no more,
water inside.
Just a little, no more than that.
Is that just for a little humidity?
That's quite a
or
lot.
something?
I would have put, if this whole bag was full of Scion, I would have put the same amount of water in.
Oh.
And then I'll tie it up and secure it. Here's another rubber band. Secure it with a rubber band. Shazam. And put it in the fridge. I might even store this bag and my other signs in another plastic bag. The important thing is to make sure that it doesn't dry out. So keeping it nice and moist. Some people will wrap their sign in wet newspaper or in an old rag. We typically find it's not particularly necessary. And the sign, if it's stored well, will store a long time. You might find that some types of Scion might have a tendency even to begin pushing in the fridge. We see it a bit with the Asian pears in particular. But for the most part, that'll be pretty solid. And we'll keep it in the fridge and then we'll pull it out. Typically this year, most of our propagation work is going to be done in March. We'll pull it out in March and start distributing it. One of the things you can also do, for example, is label it on the outside as well. That way you don't have to open everything up to see what's inside. Common sense, really.
Right. You mentioned burying it. Is that burying it
in the
bag?
Yeah.
Just
I mean, people have been grafting trees for centuries, and since long before refrigeration.
Right.
And grafting compounds and everything like that. So there are all these techniques for basically keeping the wood cool.
Yeah.
And I have friends who still bury their scion in the ground and go that way. But if you do have access to a fridge,
Right.
and you're not going to irritate your partner or housemate because they open their fridge and find it's full of scion, we know that story. You can go with fridges; they work very well for that.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's it.
So we have, let's recap. We have
Okay, timing.
Timing.
Okay,
Timing is important.
where on the tree you
Where on the tree is
cut
important.
the material. Making sure that you get the right diameter, and then the preference in terms of where you're cutting the material on the tree from. Vigorous, disease-free, preferably the sort of the laterals. Then going up to the terminals, trying to avoid the water sprouts and the suckers if you can, but very often that's sort of what we have.
Right.
And then
Labeling.
storing and labeling.
Labeling.
Labeling. Oh, I was going to say one thing. You can be a tendency to say, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to wrap my sign by just wrapping masking tape around it. Typically what we find is that wrapping masking tape around your sign doesn't work. Rubber bands are basically where you want to go.
Right.
Or if you're collecting huge bundles, you can use twine.
Twine.
That works for that.
Okay.
Okay, is that it?
I think so.
Okay,
All right.
great. We'll
All right.
do that.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Oh, did you want to plug the?
Yeah. Okay, so we've also got a lot of written, you don't need to remember all this, on our website, which is springpropagationfair.com, and on our YouTube channel, we'll have links to a lot of the information that I've just shared, and other links around the web. Interestingly, there's a lot of information out there on grafting, but not a lot of information on scion collection.
Yep. And let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions.
Thank you. Have fun
Bye-bye.
collecting.